Lord, we are here as your servants, and we want to be the most equipped people we can be to do your ministry and your work. And so I ask that this chapel today be a part of that equipping, that it can be insightful, educational, but also transformative in our understanding of what mentorship is and the power it can have in our lives. I ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So the first part of the session today is going to be hearing from just a brief little snippet from each of our panelists, their insights and experiences with mentorship. And so we're going to start off with Dr. Profitt. So if you will please go ahead and give us your little snippet.
I just want to hit 5 quick points that may be useful in our discussion. First, I conceptualize mentors not as, gurus on mountaintops, but simply as people who are further up the road than I am. And that could be spiritually, and that's probably how we most commonly think of it here. It could just be the road of life. It could be development of particular skills, abilities, knowledge bases, things of that nature. So when I am thinking of mentors, that's how I'm conceptualizing them in my life. As I think back, I realize that I've had mentors under that definition of people further up the road, speaking to me and into my life since at least early high school. At first, they were teachers, other adults in my life, but especially teachers. That continued into college, with them opening horizons for me, speaking truth, challenging me, pushing me, making me aware of viewpoints and ideas I'd never thought of before. And then I came right out of my master's degree to GBS, and here, the people who have spoken into my life most completely are people who have been in positions over me as supervisors, Dr. Farmer and President Avery especially. And it wasn't like I was in their office every week asking for help, but it was in that relationship where they were supervising my work. They also dealt with other topics. And I think often they probably had no idea the impact of what they were saying, because the Lord was using it to hit an area in my life that I needed to hear something right then, probably more than they knew they were speaking. Third, the reason that I love mentoring, value mentoring, is that I have received from others, and I feel then a responsibility, an obligation to give to other people. That's my understanding of how God's kingdom works. He loves and shapes us so that he can love and shape others through us. So we become tools that the Lord uses in other lives. And just as people further up the road from me have helped me, I hope that throughout my life I'll be able to help those who have not come up the road as far as I have yet. Fourth, mentoring for me is not permanent. My mentoring relationships have generally changed in one of 2 directions. They've either faded as I have moved on in life, or as those I have mentored have moved on in life, or the relationship has evolved into a different kind of relationship, where it's not what I would characterize as mentoring any longer. The last thing I would toss out as we begin is that, to me, mentoring need not be exclusive. I was talking with Mr. Hart before the panel today. I think every person that I would consider myself to have had a mentoring relationship with has had that same kind of relationship with at least one other person who was probably speaking into their lives on different but related areas. And I think there is often wisdom in an abundance of counselors, at least a few. And so I don't think, when I talk about mentoring, I'm not seeing that as some sort of exclusive single person that guides you.
I think I'm next. Okay. Mine is not going to be nearly as beautiful and academic.
I think I'm insulted by that. I'm not sure.
You need not be, because we're different people, so I'm going to be me. No, I'm going to be really rubber meet the road here. What has meant? I'm sorry if that sounded like an insult, because that was
I'm not really offended.
Okay, that was not how it was intended. Oh dear, to go pray. So, what has mentorship looked like in my life? And let me just throw this out. He gave you this really neat URL, which is fantastic. do listen to what we're saying rather than just typing questions, because I've been in meetings where people ask questions that had just been answered, and that's embarrassing. So listen. Okay. Growing up, I never gave a whole lot of thought to mentorship. If you had asked me if I had had a mentor, I probably would have told you no. And it's true, like Aaron just alluded to, I didn't have one grand poobah at whose feet I sat and gleaned wisdom as it fell from their trembling lips. However, I did have people that spoke into my life and did so powerfully. The older I've gotten, and I seem to be aging by the day, the more I have realized that I was given the uncommon gift, and I do mean that, the uncommon gift of having parents that actually played huge mentoring roles in my life. Now, if you haven't, don't turn me off yet, because I'm coming back to that, okay? So just stick with me and say, okay, nothing else she says matters because my parents haven't been mentors. Just stick with me. I was able to watch them live life and live it in a way that practiced loving Jesus in the mundane. I saw what it was to disagree strongly in a Christ-like way. I found out that you could be kind even when you were frustrated. I saw people say, I'm sorry, when they were wrong. They created a safe place for me to be open and honest about what I thought. I could ask questions about anything, and they would be answered in a loving, respectful, and honest way. And I believe that that is mentoring at its most basic. I didn't call it mentoring. I called it growing up in the Vernon household. But it was mentoring just the same. As I grew older, there were adults that I gravitated toward. I remember in particular a teacher I had in high school that I really liked, and I could tell that she loved and respected me. And I cringe when I think of the hours I spent just hanging out in her office after class. I know she had other things to do, but she listened to me, and she talked to me. And she talked to me about Jesus and about life, and I watched her, and I tried to be like her. As Aaron also said, when I moved to GBS, I found people here that could speak into my life. When I needed advice or truth spoken, they would speak it, and they still do. When I ran into a besetting sin that gave me a run for my money, I called on a safe person in my life. They became my go-to when I was struggling, and they gave me a safe place to be honest about my journey. They were loving, but they didn't let me by with laziness. And that's something that I really want you to hear. That is a very important quality of a mentor. They should call you on your craziness. Hopefully, they will do it kindly, but they'd better do it. If they are never blunt with you, if they never call you up short, if they are always agreeing with you or patting you on the head or taking your side, there should be a red flag waving in your face. Yes, you are awesome, and sometimes you're right. But trust me, sometimes you're also lazy and whiny and dead wrong. And you need somebody to tell you that, or you're going to live a small and stunted life. Some of the greatest gifts in my life have been people looking me in the eye and calling me out, holding up a mirror that showed me myself with all of its ugliness. And that's the only way I was able to change and grow. Mentoring for me personally has been much more about community than about one individual. Community is safe for me. When I isolate myself, I endanger myself spiritually. Through openness and honesty with truth speakers God has placed in my life, I have found freedom and I have found victory. Now, this is what I'm coming back to. I know that many of you did not see the kind of home that I saw growing up. Hear me. Do not despair. My mom didn't either. My mom grew up in a very dysfunctional home. I could tell you story after story, many of them that she doesn't even remember because she repressed the memories. She had to have siblings tell her what actually happened. But she watched people with functional homes. Before she married my dad, and again before she and my father had children, she sought out those people to speak into her life. She found out what they had done right, and she purposefully began to change the cycle of dysfunction with God as her helper. And change it she did. and I reap the benefits. If you wish to live a life that is the best it can possibly be in every way, seek godly counsel. Let people speak into your life. If there is a cycle of dysfunction, you and Jesus and godly mentors can change it. You are not alone. I am incredibly grateful this morning for the part that godly mentors have played in my life. And one of my biggest goals being here at GBS is to pass that on to as many of you as I can.
Mr. Harkoff.
Good morning. When Mr. Waters asked me to do this, I looked at the other names, and I'm just honored to be hanging out with all of you this morning, because many of you have spoken into my life and into my wife's life as well. So, mentoring, wow. When I think of the word mentoring, I don't think of like something that's super robotic. So like, I don't know that I've ever walked up to somebody and said, will you mentor me? Which if you do that, that's fine. But I think the relationships that God has placed in my life, I'm going to try to give you like a both perspective view, both being mentored by somebody and also the ways that God has allowed me to be a mentor to someone else. First of all, this is the beginning of the semester, and if you've sort of like crash landed here and are thinking about 15-hour time in Christian service, and I registered for 18 hours of credit, I have an off-campus job, I've got to get my homework done, and I have to have my devotions, and you also need a mentor, like some sort of checklist thing, like, yes, another thing on the list. Don't think like that. God has not called you, I often think about this, he's not called me to be a mentor, he's called me to be holy, and I've found that as I've pursued a deeper relationship with him, he's placed some amazingly beneficial people-to-people relationships in my life. I view mentoring basically as like building into somebody else, speaking truth into somebody else's life. Like Aaron said, Dr. Profitt said, further up the road than me. Why mentoring? Why do I need to have a mentor? I sort of came here fresh out of graduate school at 25, and I had spent a lot of time sitting in the corner playing my trumpet, and that wasn't really a skill that was super helpful to anything pretty much that I was doing here except teaching a few trumpet students. And so I felt way in over my head professionally and spiritually and in many other ways. And I realized through a series of life events, family things, that God began to show me how fallen and broken that I was. Not that I wasn't redeemed, not that I wasn't trying to see life and all of its components from God's perspective, but I wasn't doing as good of a job as I could by myself. And I realized I need outside input. If you're not there, then going to find a mentor is probably not going to be a very valuable thing for you. But I realized I don't have all the answers. I honestly didn't know the questions to ask. And I need others. If you're one of these people, I think we all get there on some gradation or another, like I can just do this myself, I can do this myself, and I can do this myself. Your growth will be stunted, and you'll have these huge blind spots in your life that you will never overcome. And honestly, like your family and the ministry God calls you to will be less significant because of it. And so, okay, what did being mentored by other people look like to me? So I'm in over my head. I have a issue that comes up on the road my first year during Swissy, and I'm like, I have no idea what to do. I'll just call Mr. Wolf and invite him out to lunch. So the Chinese buffet at that time was like $5. I was like, I'll buy him food, and he'll listen to me and give me good answers, hopefully. And honestly, that is about like as planny as I got with mentoring. So like a few years ago, I actually had some very serious theological questions that I was wrestling with, and it had implications for how I'm raising my kids and all these things. So I was like, hey, Dr. Phil, do you want to go out to lunch? I'll buy. And we sat down, and while he was eating Panera, I unburdened my tough questions to him, and that has sort of turned into a weekly Sunday meeting where we just talk about the Bible and what God's doing in our lives. If I have questions, I ask him about kids, or hey, I noticed this in this verse. Can we talk about this? Or I'm preparing a topical study on worship, and I've never done a topical study because I've barely taken any sort of preaching classes. And so how do I do a topical study? We spent last Sunday talking about topical studies. So that's what mentoring has looked like to me. When I first started working at Kenwood, I got to hang out with President Avery quite a bit more. And a lot of times the meetings that I would have in his office, or even the meetings about chapel now, we'll talk about like the chapel issue for 5 minutes, and then like what God's doing in our lives for like an hour. And I treasure those times, and I want to be somebody that seeks wisdom. So, you know, if someone's talking about some book they're reading, how it's changing their life, I'm just like dumb enough to say, hey, I'll read that book, and we'll talk about it, you know. So that's what it's looked like. It's been pretty organic. On the other side of things, as I presented myself to God as a living sacrifice and walked in the Spirit and prioritized what He cares about and my relationship with Him, God has also weaved people into my life through things that I couldn't have planned, where I've been able to speak truth into other people's life. And that, by the way, is not some sort of like parent-to-child relationship.
That's right.
So I already have 3 children, and they are very young and need lots of parenting. So like, I don't, and you really don't want like another parent either. So like, did you do your chores? Like, that's not a good framework to have. I view these relationships as mutually beneficial.
Yeah.
So I get so much blessing frequently sharing something with somebody that's impactful for them. They come back, thank you so much for sharing that with me. And I'm thinking, a week ago, Dr. Phil said that to me, and I just told you. That's pretty cool, you know, how God is using this. And I think that's a healthy way. As you grow spiritually, God's going to help you transfer. I hope you catch that today. Not just like, hey, you need to go like get wisdom from somebody, but you need to be transitioning also to someone that is sharing and building into somebody else. And you can't do that without God's Spirit, and you can't do that keeping people at arm's length. It requires a bit of vulnerability. Not that you share everything that's ever gone wrong with you with everybody, but if you're like this to people, you might share a lot, but you probably won't have a big impact on them. So that's enough for me.
Thank you. Dr. Phil?
So I'm dittoing a lot of what Sonja said. Great parents and opportunity to grow up being counseled from the get-go. One of the things they said is in the multitude of counselors, there's success or victory or wisdom, all of the 3. And so I was motivated from an early age to ask people for advice. And fortunately, I wasn't raised in an educational system that says that if you admit you don't know something, you're stupid. I was raised in a system that said admitting you don't know something is the first step to knowing something you didn't know before.
Exactly. Yeah.
So asking for counsel is just a way of growing. And I remember Dr. Bob III at Bob Jones University commenting, probably in a faculty meeting, that he made it his practice to try to skim a little cream off the top of everybody he met. And I thought, what a beautiful metaphor for looking at all the relationships I interact with as an opportunity to grow myself. There's bound to be some cream that rises to the top of the cup, so to speak, in everybody's life. And can I learn from that and grow from that? I think that being a person who is thinking that way about other people puts you in a position to be growing lots all the time. Now, I don't remember hearing the word mentor before I came to GBS, actually. So I was 31, 32, and I'd been practicing seeking counsel since I was an early teen. I think what mentoring adds beyond simply asking questions and gaining wisdom is the potential for a more focused and sustained period of counsel. Someone at the lower end may say, well, why don't we meet for some short period of time and talk about this? So more than one conversation, a series of conversations. Moving up the scale, there may be defined goals, defined lengths of time. At the top end of the scale, somebody may actually open their life and say, hey, why don't you just come do life with me for a while? That's extremely rare, because most people's life's so full that they don't have any slots to stick somebody else in. To ask somebody, would you open your life and stick me in it? Unless the Holy Spirit directs you to ask that, probably you're asking for more than somebody can give. So 2 Timothy 2:2 is an admonition to me as an ordained elder, which says, train faithful men who are able to train others also. So part of my God-given mandate is to be a person who pours into other people who are then pouring into other people. And I've looked for opportunities to do that across my time teaching here. And I think perhaps because there have been certain people who've gotten farther in the door than other people, that the other people may think that I'm not interested in or not able to or not willing to. But I think the door really starts at coming to an office or stopping on the sidewalk and saying, hey, I have a question, could I talk to you? And let things grow organically rather than shoot for a position or shoot for a relationship. So I think that covers me.
Thank you so much, panel, for sharing your insights and your experience, and I hope that you will feel free to continue to do that as we transition into the Q&A time of the panel discussion today. So I'm going to be posting a couple of questions that were submitted by the students, and actually one I'm just going to build off of what Dr. Phil just finished talking about was, how do I find a mentor here at GBS? So maybe you can even share some personal insights. Here's how it has worked for me in the past, or how it might work for a variety of students. And that's questions open to any of the panel members today.
I will just throw this out there. I don't know that I can completely answer that question. I think I've had students do it with me both ways. I've had students say, hey, I really need a mentor. Could you speak into my life? And that works okay. I think what I have seen work better. So I'm not, if you have done that with me, I'm not telling you you did the wrong thing, okay? I don't want you to hear that. But what has worked better is a student that, like Dr. Phil just mentioned, it happened kind of organically. There was a question you had in your life, or counsel that you needed in your life, or a situation you were up against, and just said, hey, can I chat with you for a few minutes? Or hey, can we go out for coffee, or whatever? And we started talking about that, and it organically led to other things. And there are some students that life just kind of threw us together. I think of a student that through a major physical problem, I ended up spending hours and hours with that student, and it grew into more of a mentoring relationship. Sometimes it just, you can't really plan it, but I think here's one thing, one reason I think the organic approaches are really good. I think sometimes it may be easy to walk up to somebody that you don't even know very well, because I think they're a good person, so I'm gonna ask them to mentor me, but you've got a lot of hard work ahead of you, just getting to know that person, and you might find that maybe you don't even speak the same language. There are people that are really great people, but you don't talk the same or relate the same. So just going to somebody and saying, hey, can I have some advice? You can find out a lot from that one conversation. You can find out if they speak your heart language, if you get what they're trying to say. And a lot of times, like I said, my most rewarding mentoring relationships with students where I've seen it benefit them and benefit me too have happened very organically.
I would echo that. The key theme that, as I listened to everyone talk, I thought organic was a major theme, and by that I mean growing out of relationship. A relationship that starts in more casually, less formally, whatever, and then grows into what I would call mentoring. Historically, for me, many of those have come out of academic advising, actually. Somebody would show up in my office to register for classes, and for whatever reason, I would feel led to ask how they were doing, and when they lied to me and said, fine, I was prompted to say, no, really, how are you doing? And out of that came longer-term relationships. I have had students who have that kind of relationship with me try to get other people to come see me for the same kind of thing, and it has worked roughly 0% of the time. No, exactly. See, it's never worked. It's never worked at all. And it's because you can't force that kind of thing. And a lot of people who might want mentoring would not like me at all. I'm not known for tact in those conversations. It's kind of a joke. People who have been in mentoring relationships with me years down the road will say to me, do you remember when you said X? And I'm horrified that I ever said those words because it's so harsh and blunt. But apparently it worked. So I think a lot of folks might think, oh, that's a great fit, and it might not be at all. Yeah.
So at the very base of what Aaron just said was somebody had a question and they came for an answer. And I really think that that's where it starts. You see a need, you see somebody who might be able to help meet that need, and you initiate asking a question. So I think every student should walk away from the chapel being challenged to be a wisdom seeker. Okay?
Absolutely.
And that comes not from looking inward, but from looking to those who demonstrate wisdom in their life and then pass that on to you. And if that turns into something more, wonderful. But just trust God's providence in that rather than, like, I'm just longing for a mentoring relationship and I can't find one and I'm so disappointed and bereft. And no, that, no.
I love it. That was a great word.
Another question that has surfaced as one of the top questions is it okay to mentor someone and not get attached to the person you are mentoring?
Yes.
Yes.
The question seems to assume that mentoring always involves some sort of more comprehensive relationship, and I don't think it does. Some people that I would consider myself to have something of a mentoring relationship with come to see me very infrequently, come with a specific question, we talk about the question, I see them again in a few months. Or they email me out of the blue, it's a graduate, they got a question, I answer the question, we move on. And that doesn't bother me. I don't need someone, and this I think goes along with what Phillip was just saying. If you go to see someone for insight and input, and it doesn't click, and you say, that's never gonna work, we're not gonna be offended. Nobody's gonna be offended by that. That's okay. I don't feel like I need to have a personal relationship with the cashier at the grocery store. I go there for a purpose, take care of a transaction, move on. And that's fine in wisdom as well, not just in retail. And so I don't think there needs to be that kind of warmer, more personal, whatever relationship.
I've had mentoring relationships that were both. I had some because of the nature of thinking of a few in particular that simply because of where the person was in their lives, we did get very close. In that case, though, I had to be extremely careful that I kept appropriate boundaries in our relationship, because there is a certain enmeshment that can happen where it becomes actually very unhealthy. And so I think, I've also had students, again, very much like Aaron, that, we had a great relationship, but we weren't buds, right? And we would, chat whenever they needed it. But then there have been others and they worked very well, where we just simply, because of the nature of whatever it was, got closer. But again, those are actually more difficult in some ways, because I had to be very careful. When you get very close, there can be perceived entitlements, maybe even. I don't know how to say that better, but this is my friend, so they should be available to me 24/7, no matter what, when, why, or how. Well, I finally told one person at a certain point, there is only one person in the universe that is going to be completely available to you 24/7, and that is Jesus Christ. And unless you learn that, if you're always, reaching for that mentor, that's a very unhealthy thing. And so I think, I think it can look very different. But yes, I think you can have very healthy relationships without it being extremely close.
I think
Next question.
sometimes people
sorry.
who are being mentored may struggle with knowing how to detach when they have decided that they've gotten what they need. And that's one of the reasons why books on mentoring talk about having time limits to mentoring relationships. But one of the ways to detach is to say thank you for what you've contributed to my life. I've really appreciated the meetings that we've been having, and as a result of life situations changing, I'm going to need to not continue that, but I want you to know that it's not in any way lack of appreciation for what you've provided, and that gives the mentee a smooth exit and while showing appreciation to the person who's contributed.
That may tie in with the next question, which is, obviously college students are pretty busy. How do they fit that into their schedules and prioritize that? Because they do view it as a necessity, but do you have any tips for how to make that work in their busy lives?
Most of the things that have come up in my life with mentoring relationships involve something I'm already going to be doing, like eating. So I'll eat with somebody rather than by myself. All of mine involve food, yes. If you take me out to lunch, I'll hang out with you anytime. I'm opening myself up. Or just like playing sports or something. Like, I'm going to go get exercise. So, do you want to play tennis or run or whatever? So, I don't think it has to be like a separate, it's not like we're going on like a 4-hour date and we're going to waste our time or something. You understand? It's something you're already doing is more efficient. I think I've said enough.
And I think some people look at mentoring and say, well, this has to be a weekly thing with X amount of time, committed to it. No, it doesn't. I mean, there may be some mentoring relationships where that's appropriate, but it may be once a semester or once a year or, and I'm guessing you probably have time for that. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but good grief.
For me, it's, I have an office and I'm there all day, whether anyone's there to talk to me or not. I'm not like twiddling my thumbs, I got work to do. Right. But if I've got a mentoring relationship with someone, almost 100% of the time, like I can think in like a decade, I can think of 2 exceptions. Almost 100% of the time, that person initiates a meeting, which means I'm not creating any kind of time burden for that person. Right. It's their schedule, it's their time. I'm available when I'm available, and so it accommodates their schedule and it squeezes in when they've got time to squeeze it in. And I'm with Sonja. It's not a regular, for me. It's rarely a regular thing. It's periodic. There may be times where a person's dealing with a particular issue, and we need to meet several times in close succession. And then there may be long periods of time where we're not interacting.
Sure. And I've done the same thing where sometimes it's appropriate to meet weekly, and that's fine. The other thing I would just throw in there, and this is absolutely not to make fun of the question, because that was a very valid question, and I think we need to talk about that. But I would throw this out too. If there's a specific issue in your life that you have a question about, you're going to talk to somebody about it. You will. You'll talk to your friends, you will text about it, you will message somebody. There's maybe a few things you don't, but a lot of the things that you would talk, you're going to talk to somebody. Well, why not talk to somebody who's maybe a little bit farther up the road and could actually help walk you through that?
Let me add another dimension here, that is of discipleship, that God expects believers to be engaged in disciple making, and mentoring can be another word for the same thing, where you're farther up the road, whether it's one step or 20, than whoever it is that you're helping take additional steps. And actually, most of the people who I would say now that I have mentored didn't ask me to mentor them. We didn't talk about it as being mentorship. It was just they asked questions and then asked if they could come ask more questions, and we did it. So I think David mentioned relationship with me and mentorship, but he didn't come ask me, can you mentor me? He just came ask questions, and then he asked more questions, and so we talked more, which is great.
Next question. As a mentor, when should you cut off someone that is unwilling to change or grow, or is just exhibiting apathy?
I don't have any good sermon, I guess, but two things. One, if I feel like what we're doing is sort of like turning into some sort of accountability thing. I've had very low success in doing like mentoring as primarily an accounting thing. So if I'm meeting with you every week, asking you certain questions that are not, so we make a plan, we're like, hey, this is how you can grow, and you're not following the advice at all, I'll just eat my lunch by myself, sort of thing. So if I feel like if the person is just like not listening to anything that I would say, I think it would be sort of a waste of time. I'll just leave it.
That's the standard answer, I think, which is if they don't do what you tell them to do it again, and then when they don't do it the second time, you say, well, I seem to have run out of advice because you're not taking the advice I gave you.
That's true. I've had to say, because I have had people that have just come back and back and back, and it's like we're rehashing and rehashing and rehashing, but they haven't taken the advice. And I think at some point you say, you know what you need to do, and I can't help you till you do it. I love you. I'm not going to cut off my relationship with you. Of course not. But we can't just keep rehashing that because it's not healthy.
I agree completely with everything that's been said. I want to add one comment about the spirit of it that I know these folks agree with. I am not looking to cut someone off.
Right. I am. Just kidding.
That's student affairs for you. What can I say?
I'm kidding.
She is kidding. I know. Anytime I get to thinking that way too much, the Lord taps me on the shoulder and says, when's the last time I did that to you?
Right. That's good.
I've been spanked a few times by the Lord when I get a little high and mighty about other people. So when people are exhibiting effort to pursue godliness and Christ-likeness, I refuse to be impatient.
Right.
Sometimes that takes grace, lots of grace, tamping down some words. But I'm speaking to you now as future mentors and current mentors in some cases. Right. I would just caution you not to be looking for people to measure up or you're done with them.
Yes.
And I know that's not at all what they were saying, so I'm not trying to say that's what they meant. I agree with them. When someone comes back around to the same issue over and over again and doesn't want to do anything about it, I don't have time for that. Now, sometimes the Lord makes me sit down and talk to the person anyway, but I'm not looking for it because to me that person isn't really interested in growth. They're interested in catharsis that allows them to feel a little bit better and go back to the way they were doing things. And along that line, I think it's important when you're in that kind of a relationship with someone that you be sensitive to the Spirit's direction about when to say what. Because sometimes people do not have ears to hear. And I am a little bit concerned always that if I say the wrong thing, if I say the right thing too soon, I may inoculate the person against hearing it when they're ready to hear it. And so for me, that looks like really trying to pay attention to what the Lord is telling me to say right then. Not in some sort of spooky, mystical sense, like I need to go over, and look in the mirror or something. Just walking in the Spirit and not thinking I've got the answers and being ready to be used of the Lord, which sometimes means, and I've heard these folks say the same thing, that you don't get to say what you want to say. The Lord, you see something in someone's life, and you start to say it, and God says no. And I've bypassed him once, and I felt physically slapped. It was not a good experience, and I took the question back before the person could answer it. So I'm off on a little tangent here, but I think it's important because we see you guys as people who will be speaking into others' lives. And so part of this panel is not like, how can you get help? But it's how can you think about how you can be used by God to minister to others. And patience and grace are really, really important.
And I just want to underscore, I agree 100%. I want to underscore what he said about walking in the Spirit. Guys, do not try to mentor if you're not walking in the Spirit, because you can do incredible harm. I cannot tell you how strongly. Even be careful about your advice if you're walking in the Spirit. If you're not walking in the Spirit. Because it is a dangerous thing to be passing out advice and mentoring when you don't have the Spirit of God. And it's okay as a mentor, and I hope that you're hearing that we're expecting you, to be in the process of either speaking into people's lives now or getting in a position where you can do that. But it's okay to feel inadequate.
Yes.
I feel inadequate every time somebody walks into my office and says, "Can I talk to you?" And the minute I don't feel inadequate, I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
Right? You should feel inadequate. I have said more SOS prayers. I've had people ask me things, and I've thought, I've never faced this before. I have no idea. And I have watched God, do amazing things as I stayed open to him. And so you need to be looking for advice, you need to be investing, but your main priority is your daily moment-by-moment relationship with Jesus. Nobody can speak into your life in place of the Holy Spirit. And so make sure you are cultivating a daily walk with the Lord.
Something she said, be careful about giving advice. I would also say to you, if you're going to seek out advice about anything, I would be careful about who you ask. Sometimes, asking a peer who's not known for their wisdom in relationships about your relationship with somebody is probably not going to be very helpful. When Jessica and I, just before we had Mallory, we had a few couples we asked about, had kids that had already been raised, that we knew their kids, and we're like, man, that's a great finished product. They must have some wisdom about raising children, and so you ask them. So I would say, if you're going to ask for wisdom or for mentoring in any area, make sure that person has some experience or something to offer you before you ask them, because otherwise you might get some bad advice.
Sure.
Final question today isn't necessarily one that was submitted this morning, but kind of came up in our discussion as we were preparing for chapel today, was what does someone seeking mentorship need to be prepared for when they enter the mentoring relationship?
Somebody mentioned this earlier, but I'll just start out tossing this out. Appropriate vulnerability and transparency. When I'm in that kind of relationship with somebody, I practice appropriate vulnerability and transparency. It's not uncommon, as has been mentioned, to talk about what God's doing in my life as I'm talking with someone else. And I expect that to be reciprocated, or we don't go anywhere.
insights.
Please ask the question again.
As a mentor is thinking about seeking out mentee is thinking about seeking out a mentor, someone to be mentored by, what do they need to be prepared for when entering into that relationship?
What about those things that you mentioned the other day? Those 3 questions. Those are really good. That's awesome.
So one of the things that I would say is, number one, don't look for a mentor. Look for advice on a particular issue that you have. Be willing to have that person say, well, that particular issue is actually related to something that's different and which may appear to be a invasion of privacy, right? Because it's very common for people to want to address surface issues that have root problems, and if you have a wise person and just say, well, the root's right down here, so that means if you don't want to go there, then obviously you don't want that person to be your mentor. And I was thinking, I only hear about this in places other than here, but there are places where there are invasive mentorship practices where a person says, I want you to hand over your journal, I want you to hand over your interior life to me, and I want to tell you that right up front, if anybody says that, that's probably something you don't want them mentoring you.
Right.
Okay. A mentor does not need access to your private ruminations in order to provide wisdom. On the other hand, there are multiple doors of vulnerability, and me opening the door to challenges I face in rearing boys is not the same thing as opening the door to challenges I face as a husband, which is not the same thing as opening a door to personal challenges that are distinct from and deeper than either of those two. So don't think that one open door equals all doors open.
Right.
They should open sequentially and probably relatively slowly.
Yeah. Knowing when, and there, one thing I hope you've heard today is that mentorship can look very different from person to person, and that's okay. So it's easy to compare, well, I don't have that kind of a relationship like that person does with their mentor. That's okay. It's gonna look different depending on who you are and what you need in your life at a particular time. But I do hope, sometimes, and I alluded to this in my original little talk, sometimes there may be issues that hit really deep and do require extreme vulnerability. Really pray about who and how. It does need to be a safe person, but you need to do it. Especially with certain issues in your life, you're going to need to get extremely honest. And so appropriate honesty, appropriate vulnerability and complete honesty at the right time to the right person, I think is extremely important.
Ryan, would you like to comment on how a person seeking advice should respond to hearing, I think you need to go to professional counseling?
Speaking from the mentor's role, if you begin hearing about things that you do not feel equipped to handle, or especially if there is concerns about safety, then that definitely needs to be something you need to be directing that person to seek out professional help, someone who can help meet that need. That doesn't mean you need to step out of their life, because they still need that support outside of a counseling relationship. But when you start feeling out of your depth, to a degree where you're thinking, I'm not sure what to say to this person right now because I'm concerned about safety, or I'm concerned about the long-term ramifications of this type of behavior, then you need to be directing them to someone who can and is skilled and trained to know how to handle the problem that they're facing.
And hearing somebody say that is actually hearing care.
Yes.
They're
Absolutely.
admitting, I don't have the answers, let me help you get to somebody who does.
Mm-hmm.
I really think of that sort of with the medical metaphor. If a doctor refers one of my kids to a specialist, I'm not insulted by that.
Right.
I'm glad. I'm really happy. And if I'm working with someone who needs to work with a counselor on a specific issue, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. That's a healing thing.
As a wrap-up, I would just encourage you to be a person who seeks wisdom. God wants to pour wisdom into your life. Wisdom is crying in the streets, and a lot of times it comes through other people. And so be seeking the wisdom that God has for you through others, and also be the type of person that is walking with the Lord in such a way that at the right time you can also be a blessing to somebody else and help them on their journey with some truth at the right time.
Well, thank you so much, panel, for your input today and for taking the time and sharing your experiences and insights. Can we give them a round of applause?